We have two great panelists today, and I'm going to give them a slightly longer introduction. Michael Mandel is going to speak first, and then Nicole. Nicole, of course, people who have been on sessions before know that she's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, a contributing editor of City Journal, and a columnist with the New York Post. She writes on urban economics and finance. She has a CFA, and is the author of After the Fall, Saving Capitalism from Wall Street and Washington. She's published analysis and opinion pieces in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, and other publications. Before coming to City Journal, she was a business journalist for Thomson Financial. She covered the international syndicated loan and private debt markets, as a BA in English literature from Tulane. Michael Mandel is chief economic strategist at the Progressive Policy Institute in Washington and senior fellow at the Wharton School of UPenn. He was chief economist at Businessweek prior to its purchase by Bloomberg, and that means he was my boss. A great boss, I must say. I jumped through his credentials just a little bit here. He's written 4 books, including The Optimistic Rational Exuberance. His economics textbook, Economics the Basics, is in its 4th edition. He received a PhD in economics from Harvard University and taught at New York University's Stern School of Business. So Michael is actually going to start, and then Nicole, and then we'll start talking with each other. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks very much, Peter. It's a real pleasure to be on a program with you. We spent a lot of time together over the years.
Yeah,
a lot of good years together at Business Week. So I'm going to just say a few things about the future of jobs. It's obviously an enormous subject that we could go on forever about, but I really want to talk about where the economy is going to go after the pandemic recession. And it's my basic observation that you can usually determine what types of jobs are going to grow during a business cycle by looking at which jobs manage to sort of do well during the recession that starts the business cycle. So right now we've been in this pandemic recession. We're slowly coming out of it. And you want to sort of ask the question, where have the jobs been created and where they haven't been created? And you look down the list and what you see is, well, the first thing you see is that tech and e-commerce have really led the parade here, okay? You've just had an enormous amount of job growth in tech industries, in e-commerce, in local delivery, in warehousing, everything that came with e-commerce. Also that's been growing has been biotech related industries, which is really interesting. I mean, it's not a surprise, but we've had years in which there has been very little job growth in pharmaceutical manufacturing and biotech. And this may be the beginning of the biotech revolution. So there may be a lot more jobs in biotech and pharma-related industries, not just during the pandemic, but even sort of over the next 10 years. We're also seeing a lot of job growth in finance and insurance. Now, if you remember, okay, the 2008, 2009 recession was caused by the great financial collapse. And what happened is a lot of banks and securities industry jobs were cut. And now they slowly seem to be coming back again. And then we need to sort of say where the jobs are not. And we've had a good 20 years where there's a lot of, where one of the real steady sources of job growth in the economy has been the healthcare industry. And what we've seen over the last 2 years is that the number of healthcare jobs, hospital jobs, and related jobs went down during the pandemic, has come back, but not very much. And it may very well be that the long boom in healthcare jobs might be over. And this might be an extremely disruptive thing. This is not what was expected. You know, we've had a lot of years in which people could count on healthcare being a continual source of job creation. And I've been waiting for this to be over. And I think maybe there's signs that, you know, people are discovering they maybe not need quite as many healthcare jobs as they thought that they did. And so what we're looking at, you know, in the larger sense is we're looking at a lot of job creation. We're looking at a lot of job creation in places where there's investment, because both e-commerce and the financial sector and biotech are all places where there's been a lot of investment in technology, creating new jobs, not automation, okay? Not automation killing jobs, but automation creating jobs. And I think one of the real themes of the next few years is going to be that the industries that do well in job creation are going to be the ones that invest in technology, invest in job creation, raising wages, and producing a world in which we are producing better jobs, not worse jobs, of people that work with technology and are not sort of pushed out by technology. So I think I'll stop right there. I think that's probably sort of the key themes that I want to sort of talk about tonight. Very happy to sort of take questions on any of these when it's time.
Well, thanks. So those are intriguing thoughts, and we're going to dig much deeper into them as the evening goes on, but now you've whetted our appetite, so turn it over to Nicole.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Peter. It's nice to be here again with all of you. Thank you to Rhoda for setting this up, and to Michael and Stephen as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about the geography of jobs, and I'll put up a few slides in a moment, but I'll give my intro before I make you look at some of the slides. This pandemic is very unusual and unprecedented, obviously, in many, many ways, from the tragic loss of life that the US has seen to the extraordinary economic relief that the federal government has offered to both unemployed individuals as well as state and local governments, something that we saw across both parties, Republicans and Democrats, last year and this year. Really have never seen this kind of economic relief, and it will probably become a template for future recessions in who should bear the pain of economic downturn that is no fault of the people who lost their jobs and lost their income. So those are a few things that, or a couple of things that make this this economic downturn quite different from anything that we've seen before. But another aspect is that the job losses and the future job creation are not falling evenly across geography, whether it is a dense urban city, a suburb that is more built up, but generally built around a dense urban city, or more rural areas. For 60 years, since really the early 1960s, when dense cities started losing their manufacturing jobs, manufacturing job loss accelerated through the 60s and 70s. There was an option for middle-class people to live in the suburbs, whether it was the mass market technology of the car, federal subsidy of highways and single-family homes. But the basic short story is for 60 years, or starting 60 years ago, cities started to enter a long period of distress through the 60s, 70s, and part of the 80s, losing middle-class residents, losing middle-class jobs. And how did they come back, and how did they start to succeed? It was converting the manufacturing jobs base and the corporate headquarters job space into being essentially a white-collar jobs hub and tourism hub. So a city like New York, for example, rather than having 1 million manufacturing jobs, it had a specific economic development strategy starting under the Mayor Wagner era in the mid-1960s, going through the Lindsay era, through the early 1970s, build tall office buildings all along the Midtown spine of Manhattan, start to rebuild the public transit system because people cannot come to work in single occupancy cars into a dense hub, and start to make the city interesting again in terms of supporting Broadway, supporting entertainment, so, building Lincoln Center, for example, at this time to give a home to the opera and the Philharmonic and the ballet. And so become a place not where people have to be because they don't have cars. There is not the technology to get to single family suburbs. There is no way to locate manufacturing jobs away from where the employees are, and the employees used to be in the city, no longer in the city. So instead, start to put the jobs where people wanted to be. The pitch by cities like New York, but not only New York, San Francisco, Boston, New Orleans, around the country was, you want to be here. And starting in the 80s, this basically worked. The young baby boomers wanted to work in finance, in advertising, later on in tech, wanted to be in dense cities and had to be in dense cities in many ways because they had to meet in person with their competitors, with their clients, with their vendors, with their colleagues and cohorts. The most efficient way of doing that was to do it in a dense downtown / midtown hub. And so you saw cities in the 1980s start to turn around their population losses. San Francisco, Boston, New York, all started to recover their economies. And with that, I will start my slides. If all goes well, you should see the slides in a moment. Yes, and I will start my slideshow. So, you know, to take the biggest and closest to us and most obvious example in the US is, of course, Midtown Manhattan. And I took all of these pictures, by the way. I did not steal the pictures. These were taken starting last spring and going through the past few weeks. So you can see something that we've never seen before last summer. Times Square, the heart of Midtown Manhattan, being completely empty. And when I say completely empty, I mean completely empty. Like, I've been walking around the last couple weeks, went around with the BBC the other day, actually, and I was telling the woman from the BBC, there's no one around. And she's like, well, yes, there's some people around. Yeah, and indeed, there were 4 or 5, 6 people walking around, but it's probably 10% of normal on any given side street. Whereas last year, it really was, you know, 5% of normal, where you could walk around Times Square, Rockefeller Center, and really not see a single soul. You know, once again, just to give you some numbers to underpin what I was saying before, New York, San Francisco, Boston, other large, dense hub cities have seen wrenching change before. Between 1950 and 1970, New York lost 19% of its peak jobs. That included nearly half of the city's manufacturing jobs, and the city lost 10% of its population. Same thing happened across the country and indeed across the world. London, over the same time frame, lost an eerily similar amount of jobs and population, just like New York, lost 1 million people, lost the manufacturing jobs base, and had to replace that with a more white-collar office-based workforce. So again, how did we recover? We did this, whether it was New York, San Francisco, London, Boston, white-collar workforce and a tourism workforce. And another part of that is education. We built global universities, NYU, Columbia. Obviously, you have Harvard, MIT, BU, Boston College in Boston, and become places where people want to be to do their white-collar business. So fast forward to just before the pandemic. In the fall, winter of 2019, in the first couple of months of 2020, global cities were kind of doing a victory lap in terms of triumphing over the losses that they saw in the 1960s and 1970s. New York had a record 4 million jobs. A lot of people said when Mayor de Blasio took office 7 years before, businesses would flee because he wanted to raise taxes, because he wasn't as business friendly as Bloomberg. That was not true. Whatever, or it could have been true, but it did not turn out to be the case. Whatever demerits de Blasio offered to the business community were outweighed by the fact that financial industry, advertising industry, tech industry, they still really, really wanted to be in cities like New York and San Francisco. Same thing in San Francisco. They've had a homeless mental illness problem for many years now, predates the pandemic, quality of life concerns on the streets, but people did not say, I am fed up with this, I am leaving San Francisco, because the benefits outweighed the cost of staying there. And of course, and I'll read you one quote from Mayor Lindsay back in 1967 in New York City, a report that he commissioned and put out a little bit less than 55 years ago. Concentration is the genius of the city, its reason for being, the source of its vitality and excitement. We believe the center should be strengthened, not weakened. We hope to see several 100,000 more office workers in the business districts. A lot of things went wrong during the Lindsay years, but he got this right. This really was the future of the city. If you think about when he made the comments that he wanted New York to be fun city, everyone made fun of that at the time because it wasn't that fun to be in New York with rising crime, public sector strikes, the transit strike of 1966, a lot of social problems in terms of amount of guns and drugs that cities had never had to deal with before. But Lindsay got this right. To attract people, cities had to become fun cities, and that is what the successful ones did. By contrast, if you were to look at a city like Detroit, never made the jump between the industrial manufacturing era and the post-industrial sort of fintech era. Part of the reason is because they did not have the entertainment, tourism, and white-collar job space, and unfortunately never end up rebuilding their population, certainly not alone. Other cities, St. Louis, many Midwestern Rust Belt cities never made that jump for the same reason. So you look at Midtown Manhattan on the eve of the pandemic, some of the densest job concentration in the developed world, 150,000 jobs per square mile, not just important to Manhattan, but going out a 100-mile radius, Midtown Manhattan was the underpinning of wealth for large parts of 3 states and for the suburbs of New York, Westchester, Long Island, New Jersey. For example, more than 40% of the tri-state region's nearly 3 million office jobs are or were in Manhattan. Office jobs are 30% of the tri-state region's jobs, but make up more than half of wages. And Manhattan, with only 20% of the city's population, had half of the 400,000 retail jobs. So what does that mean if you say, I'm in New Jersey, I never go to the city, I don't care about the city? Most likely the wealth of your community is in large part dependent on people going to Manhattan and bringing income home. So the local dentist, the local lawyer, local private schools, local restaurants, local entertainment options, they sort of depended on Manhattan, even if large numbers of the people who live there never personally go to Manhattan. You know, the breadwinner would go to Manhattan, take the money home, everyone in the community would enjoy that wealth. So, and again, just to reiterate, back another person who got it right, just like Mayor Lindsay back in 2003, Bloomberg said, if New York is a business, it's not Walmart. Yes, it costs a lot of money to live and work in New York, but it is worth it. We are offering a luxury product. Again, was true at the time. Is that going to be true after the pandemic? What are the things that people need in order to concentrate their business in Manhattan and in order to want to come to work in Manhattan? Competent service delivery. You are paying high taxes if you are a business, but you are getting high public sector service delivery in return, meaning when you walk from the Port Authority bus terminal to your office building, you should not be accosted by many people showing signs of severe mental illness being untreated by city, state, or federal governments. Attractive amenities. So you want to have high-end restaurants to go to, you want to have the opera, you want to have Broadway, in little competition from other locales. In other words, if you love riding your bike to work, you can't do that anywhere besides New York City or Boston. So you locate yourself in these dense cities. So even before COVID, these things were pressured. In one way, it was the cities being victim of their own success. Very high real estate prices, real estate prices being pushed up by global capital. So in other words, not only demand from people who live in New York, but demand from people all over the world who don't want to live in New York. They only want to have a property here. Why do they want to do that? Because the value of the property would continue to go up. Same issues in London, same issues in San Francisco and in other global cities. Pressure from lower cost locales who have gotten better over the years at offering what used to be unique to New York and other big cities. In other words, being able to offer art galleries, museums, some limited live entertainment, which is good enough for most people. And the federal tax law 2017 makes it more expensive to live in a high cost city if you make a lot of money. Another thing is the reversal of favorable demographic trends. Baby boomers came to New York in the 1980s. They are retiring now. They're a little bit tired of all of this. Not clear if similarly large demographic is going to quickly replace them. Obviously, after COVID, all of these things just concentrate and become an even greater pressure on the city. For example, what have people been looking at when they look at Manhattan, when they are wondering, should I bring my employees back to our $100 square foot office buildings in Manhattan? If you've been sitting in New Jersey, Westchester, Long Island, Connecticut for the past year, these are the images that you see coming out of Manhattan. They are a distorted picture. Most of the time when you walk around here, things are terrific. You know, I was in Bryant Park today. Everyone is sitting out on the grass, reading their books, talking to their friends, having a drink. But that is not the picture that a lot of the rest of the country has been getting over the past year. So what if this time is different in terms of what if we see a dispersal of all of these high-end jobs away from the dense urban hub? No one knows the future, just like John Lindsay didn't know the future, Bloomberg didn't know the future. Any predictions anyone makes may be wrong, but we see some worrisome signs that it's not only capital that is mobile this time, but also the mobility of high-priced labor. For example, major hedge funds announced last fall they're going to move their headquarters from Manhattan to Palm Beach. Creation of satellite offices, what does that mean? If I'm Facebook, I can say I now have a big satellite office in New Jersey. So that means that my workers who live in New Jersey, used to work in Manhattan, can now say, you know what, I now work at the satellite office in New Jersey. Even if they continue to work at home part of the time, they now pay lower New Jersey taxes compared to the higher New York taxes. Their job is not considered to be a New York job. So when you see things like Apple creating a second headquarters in Austin, part of that is that employees can say, I am no longer connected to the head office in California. I am an employee of Austin. And if I don't live in California, there's not a lot that the state of California can do about that. They will try. We will see a lot of court cases over these tax jurisdictions in the next few years. But again, predictions can be wrong, but they will probably lose. Again, replication of amenities elsewhere. For most people who don't go to the opera every single night, having a small theater, having a small art museum is good enough. They do not have to live near Midtown Manhattan to enjoy these things. In the perceived long-term security risks of dense cities, New York is actually much safer than Florida. With all of the talk of rising crime in New York and people fleeing to Florida, even with the murder rate in New York up 40%, you are safer in New York than you are in Florida. You are safer driving your car in New York than you are in Florida. On any level of living a long, robust life, statistically, you are safer in New York. But perception is not reality. A move toward gated communities, sort of more Latin American style of living, as the political and social risks of addressing crime grow, is certainly conceivable. And the biggest issue to whether we can rebuild jobs in the dense cities is mass transit. In a normal pre-COVID day in New York, 3 million people come to Manhattan every day, go home at the end of the day. 75% of those people come in on some form of mass transit. We cannot rebuild the dense urban hub as a locus of jobs unless we get people comfortable on mass transit again. It doesn't mean being comfortable on a train with 10 people when you can all be socially distanced. It means being comfortable on a crowded train where you are standing shoulder to shoulder with other people, and some of those people are coughing. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just saying this is the reality that the cities face in rebuilding the pre-COVID economy. Is people have to be comfortable in doing those sorts of things. And you see subway ridership from last April. We've made it back up to 40% of normal ridership. We've got about 2.1 people riding subways every day compared to 5.5 million before COVID. Clearly nowhere near normal, although better when it was 5% of normal last year. So some of the superficial things that you hear before I'll complete my presentation: cities always bounce back. That's not true. They don't always bounce back. Many cities in the US never bounced back from the industrial age. We'll convert office buildings into housing. That is fine as a last resort, but cities do not work unless they have a dense hub of office jobs. A lot of people who live in New York already walk to work. If you think about the neighborhoods that are within walking distance of Midtown Manhattan, hundreds of thousands of people do walk to Midtown Manhattan, including me. But if you do not have that nexus of tall office buildings close to each other, you lose a lot of what has underpinned a three-state region for 60 years. Another thing, although it's its own topic by itself, is we don't have a housing shortage. We have a highly subsidized we have a shortage of highly subsidized housing. You can't provide highly subsidized housing unless you can offer high permanent subsidies for that housing, which is not something that distressed cities are in a position to do. It is not clear that you would want to locate highly subsidized housing in what used to be your office district. So what do cities have to do to rebuild these jobs? They have to really go back to the fun city idea, but they have to do it even better than they were doing before the pandemic. In other words, transit has to be more pleasant than it was before, because people do have the option of staying home at least some of the time. Same thing with quality of life and with sales tax rates, income tax rates, other tax rates. And again, and I'll conclude here, cities have to understand that they have to be where people want to be, not where people have to be. Never before in the history of dense cities have people proven that they can work at home for 14 months. They may not like doing it, they may be bored, they may be less productive over time, but they have proven that they can do it, which is something that we've never seen, whether it was the manufacturing transition to the white collar workforce, loss of population in the 70s, never had dense urban areas empty out for well more than a year. So the rebuilding and attracting people back to their offices is really key. And from right now, can we do it? Yes. Will we do it? Not clear yet what the answer to that is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And we have a lot to chew on here. So I'm going to go back to Michael Mandel. One thing I can ask you that bears a little bit on what Nicole was just talking about. One of the big job growth sectors for New York in particular was healthcare. It was a lot of healthcare jobs nationally, but New York in particular. And you said something that surprised me, and I want to ask you to expand on it, which is that maybe the rapid growth in healthcare is tailing off a little bit. And it's so funny because just right before this, I was speaking to a doctor friend of mine who also was worried about jobs in healthcare. He's near retirement, so it's not an issue for him, but it seemed to me that healthcare is the kind of good that you consume more of as incomes rise, and incomes are rising over time. Society's aging. And I would think that there'd be increasing demand for healthcare. That would be a growth industry for as far as the eye can see. So why do you think that's not the case?
You would think so, wouldn't you? So we've had a long period where the number of healthcare jobs has grown a lot faster than the number of patients or the population, even when you've adjusted for aging. So we've had a situation really of, however you measure it, of falling productivity in the healthcare sector. One of the things that the pandemic has shown us is that when push came down to shove, you would have thought that you would have increased the amount of healthcare workers to deal with the pandemic. And in fact, it went the other direction.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that I consider this to be a long healthcare bubble, okay, that may have come to an end. And I think you raise an interesting question about, you know, healthcare as an urban amenity. So when I think about urban areas and jobs, I think about ecosystems. And you had manufacturing, and manufacturing was replaced by finance. And then what you saw in London and New York and San Francisco is when the finance sector went down, that actually created space for tech and startups. So when I look at this, this is actually related to where I think the job growth is. If I look at this, think of this as being an era in which tech jobs are growing, okay, and startups are growing. You may actually see that just like a forest fire creates space for sort of small growth that couldn't happen if you were sort of had big trees, that a lot of the moving out of expensive office users from downtowns may actually create space for new startups to emerge. And I mean, that may not be sort of an immediate situation, but if I look at sort of growth areas of the economy, that's what I kind of see. Now, healthcare, remember, doesn't use the same real estate as offices do. They have their own very distinctive real estate. It's funded in a different way. And so it may not be, they still may sort of serve as an anchor, but without necessarily creating more jobs. So I think that one of the interesting characteristics of the next boom may in fact be a switch of jobs from the delivery of lots of workers with services to the pharmaceutical and biotech industry and manufacturing again, right? We're sort of producing rather than services. And so, you know, yes, you know, we need more drugs when we get older. It rises very fast with aging. We may need, but you know, when you're giving people pharmaceuticals, you're actually substituting for the healthcare workers. So it's a different type of situation.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, I'm sort of looking at, you know, if you're running startups, you actually want to be near other people. Okay. You're not going to be out sort of an atomized in your own bedrooms. It doesn't quite work that way. So yeah, the healthcare, you know, what happens to the healthcare industry will have an enormous effect on what sort of degrees people get, how they sort of retool themselves after their jobs go down. Right? And so that's really one of the most important questions going forward.
So great. I want to ask you and Nicole the same question about manufacturing. You said something intriguing now just a moment ago, that you could actually see growth in manufacturing even in cities. Can you talk about that? And then I want to hear what Nicole has to say about that too, since she talked about the decline in manufacturing over many decades in New York.
So I've written a lot about digital manufacturing, okay, and I've written a lot about, you know, you can have small distributed factories, you know, in a way that you couldn't have before, and in a way that was not actually possible before in terms of pollution. So we could sort of be locating factories downtown. You know, if I think about use of space, I could be sort of using space for factories digital factories of a different sort, maybe related to pharmaceuticals. I could be using space for agriculture. Okay, I'm not trying to sort of be weird here at this point. I'm just thinking about where the cycles end up going, okay? And whether or not from the point of view of energy usage, we want to have various parts of our economy concentrated or less concentrated. And how that's going to work out is not clear, but you can start to see the pictures of changes in the patterns of where businesses locate, whether you've got more manufacturing in rural areas or urban areas or suburban areas, and a very different sort of manufacturing as well.
Yeah, so I want to ask Nicole about that, but also you mentioned agriculture, which is even more counterintuitive. I know there are these urban farms with hydroponics and so on.
Well, the question is if we're moving into a period where we're trying to reduce the amount of energy usage.
Yeah.
How does one do that? Okay. Well, one doesn't, you know, reducing the amount of water usage. And I think about that we're moving into, you know, the era that we've moved out of is the era of the information revolution. And now we're moving into the biosciences revolution. And how does that play out in which industries, okay? And how does that relate to where the jobs are created, okay? And what sort of jobs are being created?
Yeah. Nicole, what did you want to add about that?
Yeah, I mean, we have some manufacturing still in New York, and actually, Bloomberg did focus on this a little bit in building out the Brooklyn Navy Yard for small scale, high-end manufacturing, high-end furniture, some high-end metal making, things where the client usually wants a custom product. You know, if you want custom-made cabinets for your kitchen in your $5 million apartment. Those types of things it's better to make them near the client. So we've done pretty well in that, but it's hard to see. And we also have hydroponics. I mean, we have some of the lettuce makers, tomato growers in Brooklyn and actually in Newark, not very far from New York City. You know, if you go to the Whole Foods in Manhattan and Brooklyn, it'll say lettuce was grown in Newark, tomatoes were grown in Newark. So we can do some of that, and we can probably do more of it. I don't think it would ever be a large portion of New York City jobs. I mean, if you think of where New York is in manufacturing now, it's about 50,000 jobs. So a little bit shy of a couple of percent of the city's private sector jobs, which is not nothing. I mean, these are good paying middle class jobs, but are we going to be manufacturing mass market products for export in New York City? Probably not. Same thing with agriculture. I mean, we manufacture niche agricultural products for a local market. We can probably do some more of that, but is it something that could replace hundreds of thousands of white collar jobs? I'm willing to be wrong, but I don't see it right now.
Yeah.
Let me actually just talk a little bit about shortening of supply chains, okay? Because one of the things that the pandemic showed us is having really long supply chains was not a good idea, okay? And I think when you think about people not producing for export necessarily, but sort of creating your ecosystem so that they have to sort of travel not quite as far for the things that you need, okay? And how you sort of the high-end, I'm familiar with the high-end manufacturing, you know, craftsman-like manufacturing that's in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking things that are sort of digitized, okay? Whether, you know, it's the 3D printing, it's the robotics, okay? It's being able to sort of make a variety of different products in the same area so that you have the option of producing more of what you need closer to what you need. Okay, I think what we're going to sort of learn is the real Achilles heel of the cities was that they're too dependent on outside supply chains. And to the degree to which cities are able to sort of shorten that up, they're going to be better off.
All right, so I want to go with a really, really big question, which we haven't tackled yet, which is, will there be jobs in the future at all? I'm looking out obviously beyond the next 5 years, but up until the the COVID crisis, there was a lot of talk about how we were going to have universal basic income. That was the Andrew Yang argument, because technology, robots, and so on would kill all the jobs, and we were supposed to think that's a good thing because, hey, why work if machines can do everything for you? And yet here we are in a situation where unemployment fell. We had too few workers rather than too many before COVID hit. Unemployment very briefly shot up to 15% or so at the worst, but now it's quite a bit down again, and companies are reporting that they can't find the workers they need. So I'd like to ask both of you, how do you explain that? It certainly doesn't fit with the fear that robots are going to take away all the jobs.
Well, you know, Peter, that there's no evidence historically that automation destroys jobs. Okay, it just isn't. And let me actually give you a current example, the best example that I know, which is Amazon's fulfillment centers, which are heavily roboticized, which have hundreds of thousands of workers. Okay, hundreds of thousands of robots. Okay, sort of scurrying around the fulfillment centers, picking up stuff. And you might say, how could those, aren't those going to destroy jobs? Well, it turns out, of course, that Amazon is the greatest job producer in not just in the country, but in the world. And the reason why is that what robots do is they lower the cost of the service. And if you do it right, they lower the cost of the service enough to sort of increase the demand. And the lines cross in the opposite direction. Okay, so you could very easily have a situation where investing in technology creates jobs and that doesn't destroy it. And so far, that's what we've seen. All right. And we would see this going back to the manufacturing question. Okay, manufacturers have sort of really been lagging in their investments in technology, just across the board. US manufacturers have been horrible at this. Potentially, if they invested more, their costs would be lower, their prices would be lower, they'd be able to compete better against the Chinese, and we'd have more jobs here. So there really is not, there is no evidence, we have no anecdotal evidence of automation destroying jobs on net. The recent data doesn't show that either. So right. I'm kind of a skeptic on that.
So before we go to Nicole, I just want to follow up on one question though, because when you talked about healthcare and you said, well, healthcare created a lot of jobs, but that was because they were it was a bubble and they were actually not very productive. But that seems to fight your argument, right? That was a case where
remember the prices of healthcare just kept going up and the funding for healthcare kept going up. So it was a funny situation where so much of the funding was coming from the government, and one can sort of argue what all of the different considerations that went into this. But we sort of had kind of reached the limit of what people were willing to pay, right? And at that point, you have a situation where the price gets too much and you need to find ways at that point to make it cheaper. And you need to find ways to make it better. The problem is we have a healthcare system that's not only expensive, but people are not happy with. And that's right. A bad combination.
Yeah. Nicole, what do you think about this whole concept that we're going to need to have universal basic income because there won't be any jobs?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of universal basic income. I mean, I agree with most of what Michael said, but if we ever were to get to a point where the economy was not creating jobs, which is not where we are, we would have to create jobs because people need something to do all day. Most people are not very good at filling 16 hours a day productively with leisure time. And of course, if you don't have to have a job, then what's the point of education, which is what people spend much of their day doing if they don't have a job yet. So in terms of should people be staying at home left to their own devices, I mean, we have seen a taste of that over the past 14, 15 months with children and teenagers unable to go to school, people unable to go to their workplaces. And I think most people would agree that it is fairly unhealthy. And so jobs are exercise, jobs are socialization, jobs are exercising your brain. This is a reason to get up in the morning and get dressed and aim for higher education. So to say to tens of millions of people, you have no economic use in the economy. We are just going to pay you to be quiet and not to bother us very much. I don't think would be a very good development. And beyond that, there are all sorts of problems with universal basic income. Like Andrew Yang, for example, his proposal for New York City and running for mayor is to give half a million poor New Yorkers $167 a month. I mean, I don't mean to sound flippant about it, but it's like, that's almost the exactly wrong amount of money. That if you have serious problems which prevent you from working productively in the economy, whether it's mental illness, drug addiction, and so forth, $167 a month is not going to help you, but it's enough that many people will say, oh, well, we already helped these people. We gave them $200 a month. That's all we have to do. So it is not really very well thought through, either on the local level or the national level. For example, much of this money, if we did a truly universal basic income program across the nation and actually gave it to everybody, it's just going to find its way into higher housing prices. That's exactly what we've seen in much of this economic relief and stimulus that's made its way through the economy over the past 14 months. It is pushing up housing prices, food prices, and other prices that are relatively sticky. Now, of course, you can say, well, we'll build more housing. Sure, but we don't, in practice, if not in theory, we don't do that very quickly. There is nothing indicating that we're going to have a more efficient housing market anytime soon. So if you're giving people a few $100s more a month, that is going to go into the price of housing they are either buying or renting. Not all of it, but some of it. It is a highly inefficient way of getting people money, to say the least.
Great. Okay. I want to thank two people who put questions into the question and answer box, Janissa Brunstein and S. Smith. I didn't give them credit, but they asked questions that you guys have already answered. And I wanted you to keep those questions coming because we still have a good amount of time left. And we
Can I go back and sort of talk a little bit more about why we're not going to run out of jobs?
Yes, please.
I want to sort of build on the questions that were on the chat. Okay. Yeah. So, let's actually go back at Amazon and e-commerce. The thing there, what e-commerce has done really is actually taken unpaid hours, household shopping hours, out of the household sector and moved it into the market sector. Okay. So you can see in the data this really sharp, 25% drop in the amount of time that people spend shopping. Okay, which adds up to an enormous, if you turned it into hours, adds up to an enormous amount of jobs in the economy that have now been moved into the market sector. Okay, where they can actually be, where you can actually use technology to make them more productive. So think about all the, a lot of the way we create jobs in this economy is by taking things that were formerly done either badly or by unpaid labor, move them into the market sector where we can apply technology and do them more productively and make us all richer, okay, and create jobs at the same time. So when I look for things that I want to create jobs for, I look for things that are too expensive to do. And one of my favorite examples is pedestrian bridges. Pedestrian overpasses are extremely useful. They help the traffic, they help the pedestrians, they lower the amount of accidents. They're also incredibly expensive. So you can imagine if we could make them cheaper by automating construction, we would create more jobs for construction workers. We would also, because we were building more pedestrian bridges, we would also make people better off, and we make the traffic faster too. So you go around and you think about everything you would like to do that is too expensive, and think about that's where automation and technology and increased productivity could create more jobs rather than sort of lose them.
Love it, love it. That's a cool example. The policy question for you. I'm going to come back to this, the questions in the Q&A for a second, but I have a policy question about the mismatch between the skills that available workers have and the ones that employers need. Has that mismatch grown because of COVID and how it's changed the nature of the economy? And what can be done about it? Is it something that can be solved by the private sector, or is there a problem that the government needs to get involved in? And I'll start with Mike and then go to Nicole.
So I divide jobs into two types. One is cognitive jobs and the other is cognitive physical jobs. Okay, we don't have pure physical jobs anymore, very few of them. Cognitive physical jobs are jobs that both use your hands and your labor, but also use your mind. And you can think of that as being something where you're working with robots, for example. And the problem is in the last business cycle, we mostly produced cognitive jobs. There was a mismatch. Okay, so the tech sector, the growth in healthcare mostly produced cognitive jobs. Okay, the growth in the tech sector mostly produced programmer jobs until we got to e-commerce. And e-commerce has produced lots of jobs for high school educated workers at basically the same entry level wages they were getting in manufacturing. And so really we're sort of moving into this period, and I've sort of written a lot about this in terms of 5G. Okay, 5G, 5G telecom jobs are going to have to create a lot of cognitive physical jobs for people to do installation of communications equipment and so forth. So I think that the mismatch problem was real for a period of time, and that it's basically solving itself, that we're creating jobs, we're creating a lot more jobs for high school educated workers, okay, who are able to work with robots rather than fighting them.
Fascinating. And Nicole, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think most of the mismatch solves itself over time in that people learn and evolve on the job. I mean, if you started in the nursing profession 25 years ago, very different job than it is today in terms of the tech that you are using, for example. But you learn day by day how to adapt all of these new things that you need to know into your job. I mean, you don't even realize that you're doing it in many cases. I think we can augment that with continuing vocational education, where people do not have to leave a job and be retrained, but something that this just becomes part of the culture, that everyone does 6 weeks of VOTEC every 2 years and does that seamlessly as part of their job. And you can do that with tax credits and other subsidies. But yeah, I think, and I also think a lot of the mismatch is not so much a mismatch of skills, it's a mismatch of how much employers are either willing or able to pay. And you certainly see that in the tech industry, in terms of the tech industry wanting to age people out of programming and other tech jobs at a certain, well, obviously, if it's aging out, it goes beyond a certain age where the money that people demand and the middle and the advanced stages of their career are just not what the tech industry is willing or able to pay. And so they can backfill all of this with cheaper, younger workers. But that is not really a mismatch in skills. It is a mismatch in the economics.
Okay. Okay, well, great. I'm going to jump around through the very interesting questions in the Q&A. This is one for Nicole, and it's person, anonymous attendee wants to know, are there any cities in the Rust Belt that you foresee progressing in an economy where people can work online?
Work online, if we mean 5 days a week working at home in your home or apartment, most likely not. But I think what we will see is tech companies much more willing and flexible to set up small satellite offices in multiple cities. And they can do that if they're a big enough company like Facebook or Google in having their own office space, or they can do it through shared office space. And saying to an employee, if you don't want to live in San Francisco or in Silicon Valley or in New York anymore, if you want to take a chance on living in Detroit, living in a smaller, lower cost city, you're welcome to do so. And you can go to the satellite office in that city 3 or 4 days a week. In some ways, a city like Detroit before the pandemic, it goes too far to say that it was reviving, but there were certainly positive signs in Detroit building a modest ecosystem of tech, marketing, other white collar jobs around the higher tech auto industry. I mean, electric car development, some level of self-driving and automated car development. Ford was repurposing the old rail station, the sort of Grand Central Station of Detroit, was repurposing that, and still is, for high-tech auto jobs. People who want to be in an urban environment but don't want to be in the New York and San Francisco environment were taking a chance and living in downtown Detroit. I think we should hopefully see more of that as both large companies and startups realize, yes, people need to be together. No, they can't work at their kitchen tables for the rest of their lives. But do we need to have tens of thousands of people in one urban area? Probably not.
Yeah. Okay, and here's one for Mike, and it comes from an old friend of mine named Kate McEwen. And she asks, I'd love to hear Mike talk more about the possibility for entrepreneurs to flourish like the young trees after the forest fire. How would he assess their potential addition to the economy in the short term, and how long would it take for them to create jobs that equal those gone now in the city?
Well, let's first, before we talk about equaling jobs lost in the city, let's actually move New York City and London out of the picture, because the financial sector jobs that they had were just very different than anything else. Okay, so that's just, it's not fair to sort of talk about replacing. So remember, what do startups need? Startups need low cost. They need space, they need low cost, they need to be together, okay? And so what was happening in the overheated environment before is that they could not compete against the high-end retail, the high-end financial services, the high-end lawyers. They just couldn't compete. They were being driven out. And in some sense, it was killing the lifeblood of these big cities. And so what we're going to see is that in the empty spaces, you're going to start seeing companies moving in that are lower cost, that don't have to make such a big nut right away. Okay. Most of them will fail or stagnate. A few of them will prosper and grow and turn into the next wave of big growth companies. Now, my particular view is that the era of, that the tech guys will continue to grow just the way that the industrial guys grew in the 1950s and the 1960s at the rate of the economy. And what we're going to see is a biosciences wave that will create new products and new jobs of a kind that we were not aware of before. So, how long will it take and where will it be? I think that's a very interesting question. Okay, are we going to see it in places where you didn't have growth before? You go back to the Rust Belt question, right? Who is going to sort of provide the subsidies, the venture capital funding, the building around, say, Washington University in St. Louis, to be, to just give one example, okay? Or building around some other university in another place which has been maybe overlooked before. So I actually see this as a period of real flourishing. New York City itself may not return to quite what it was before. New York has gotten scarred by the pandemic. The numbers, the impact on New York is, you look at the numbers and it sort of stands out as being much different than anything else. Okay. But I think that in a lot of other cities, you're going to see a real rebirth.
Right. So Rhoda asked us to talk about unions a little bit, and I'd like to ask both of you, maybe we'll start with Nicole in this case, what you think the role is for labor unions in the next coming decades.
Well, I think we have to, and it's an excellent question, Rhoda. I think we have to differentiate between private sector labor unions and public sector labor unions, where in the private sector, there's, for industries that have long been unionized, there's always been a natural tension in that the private sector union leaders know that they can't make demands that are so unreasonable that they either put the company out of business or send the company to states or out of the country where they can just entirely avoid the union. And of course, in the latter case, many unions miscalculated with the migration of auto industry jobs from the Rust Belt to southern regions of the United States. But there did exist that tension where, and we saw after the financial crisis, the auto unions were willing to make concessions and make a deal, particularly on health benefits and pay tiers and work rules for newer employees in order to preserve these jobs. I think with potential unionization of Amazon employees, other mass scale lower wage service industry jobs, that's fine. That can be a healthy phenomenon. And we've actually seen Amazon pushing for the $15 minimum wage, both in their own workforce and pushing for this at the national level, offering bigger bonuses, some better working conditions, although I hardly think they're there yet. That is partly a response to the union pushes. So far unsuccessful, but it is a credible threat to them. And so I think those are good developments. I think on the public sector side, it's a different situation. Michael was just talking about New York City. One of the big impediments to New York being flexible enough to cut costs, but also maintain a level of public service where companies do want to relocate these jobs back in Manhattan. Once this federal relief money goes away over the next 18 months, if New York has not repopulated its office district exactly the way it looked like before the pandemic and actually have some growth in that to keep up with the growth in government costs, the city budget will be in real trouble. I mean, already the valuations of the commercial real estate, you can see some of the real estate outside my house here in Midtown Manhattan. They're projecting double-digit declines in the value of some of this commercial real estate, already having an impact on the budget, but that impact is muted right now because of the federal relief money. If we're sitting here 2 years from now and we've lost 10% of our tax revenue, we cannot have unions that are entirely inflexible in terms of givebacks on things like paying some portion of their own healthcare costs, givebacks in terms of the pension age. Do I have to work for 22 years before I retire if I'm a uniform worker, or should it be more like 25 or 30 years? No indication over the past 40 years that New York City public employees are willing to make those concessions. And frankly, you can't blame them because they've never had to. Why would you give something up if you don't have to give it up? I don't make voluntary financial concessions in my life. The trick is will the union leaders understand, if this is the case, that this time is different, and go to their members and say, yes, you have to make these concessions or the city is not going to come back?
Janissa Bunstein asks a question for both of you about outsourcing. This was a big topic a while ago. We haven't heard about it as much lately. You know, that all the jobs are going to go to China, for example.
They've all gone to China. So
they've all done it. That's done over.
Don't worry. Okay. So think about this in a different way, which is we had very long supply chains that were broken by the pandemic, and it turns out that countries that had produced their own PPEs did better. Countries that produced their own vaccines did better. There has been an underestimate of the importance of having supply chains that are shorter and more resilient, right? And there's still kind of a tension there, okay? And I spoke about this before. You know, one of the things that I think this has taught everybody is that the nation's supply chains need to be shorter and more diversified. And so for pretty much every input, you should actually have a local supplier or a supplier that's in your country. You should be creating capabilities. And so outsourcing in the sense of things moving that are being produced here, well, you know, the biggest issue is semiconductors, okay? So there's been a lot of movement of the semiconductor industry, but that's a question of financing and funding. Other things, I expect to see a movement back again as we learn how to sort of invest in technology and manufacturing. So if the word outsourcing you should add in the benefits of shortening your supply chain.
Yeah. Another question for, did you want to add something on that, Nicole, or did you go another question?
Yeah, I would just say that I agree with Michael that with low value consumer goods, it doesn't matter if you don't have a supply of them for 6 months, like greeting cards that make music when you open it up. I mean, that never existed before people in China were willing to work at such a low wage as Michael.
If I couldn't get my greeting cards, I would be really sad.
Right, Daniel Alpert, as he used that example in one of his books about 15 years ago, absolutely correct. Even something like, if I can't get a washing machine, if there's a six week delay in the supply of that product, as there basically is right now, that is a higher value good where people are going to be quite upset that they can't receive it. So as we go up the supply chain, and as things become national security issue, like with the semiconductors, chips, and so forth, or the PPP, I think we will either resource much of that here. Doesn't mean we're going to resource it in New York City, but it will be in the United States or closer to the United States in Canada and Mexico as we go up those supply chains. And we see that in President Biden's infrastructure plan, in providing $50 billion in credits for companies to start rebuilding these supply chains.
I have a question for both of you, which is, what would you advise a high school grad, somebody who's graduating this spring from high school, trying to decide what to study in college, planning a career? What advice would you give?
I would suggest something in the biosciences, okay, or something in technology at this point, because those are going to be the two growth areas going forwards and give you a good background in key areas. So, and I would actually, to be honest, I would actually stay away from vocational healthcare programs.
Why is that?
I think there's going to be an oversupply of healthcare workers. Not that we don't need them, but we've ramped up the supply so much that there's going to be an overshoot.
All right, so on the biosciences, what if this high school grad says, I don't like science? What's your answer to that?
What are they saying? They don't like
I don't like science. I like English or social studies or something.
Well, they're going to become a journalist then.
Oh, there's a solution.
Okay.
No, but seriously, not that is an issue. Like some people don't have the aptitude or the inclination for biosciences, and yet if that's the growth area, does that mean they just need to get over it, and do what they can get a job in?
Well, why wouldn't it? Why? I mean, you asked me what I would tell them.
Yeah.
They don't have to like it.
Okay.
Right? Okay.
That's fair. That's fair.
Because the thing is at this point is that I thought you were going to ask me a different question, whether they should go to college or not. Okay. And whether or not this economy at this point, we're really going to see over the next year or two whether there's a shortage of workers without a college education. Yeah. We're start seeing a rise in wages finally for what we've called essential jobs.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I mean, let's just look at Uber, for example. Okay. We haven't seen, in most places there's a shortage of Uber drivers. Okay. Because it's dangerous. It's dangerous and it hasn't been good work. And the question is whether or not they're going to get compensated appropriately for it, whether the market is going to work. And if the market works at this point, we could very well sort of see an increase in pay, a narrowing of the gap between jobs with and without college, and that could change the decision making that people do.
What would you say to a high school grad, Nicole?
My advice is that you should always have a part-time job, even when you're going to school, because it is good to always be working and always have some financial responsibility for your own living. It is good to start that habit early, even if you're only working 10 hours a week. And it is good for your own time discipline in organizing your own time for studying, for writing papers, for doing your school assignments. It's actually helpful. It's more helpful to be more busy than less busy. Now, as with any rule, there are exceptions to this. If you are the smartest biotech student in the entire world and have gotten a top slot at MIT to study bioscience, should you be working at the local restaurant or the local clothing store? Probably not. You should be spending that time studying. But for most people, you don't need to be focused on your studies 110 hours a week. You should be spending some of that time entering the workforce early, because it teaches you how to be flexible, how to compromise, how to get someplace on time, even if you don't feel like getting up that day and going there on time, and how to get along with other people, even if you don't like them or don't want to spend time with them. A useful life skill, doing something that you don't want to do. But on the other hand, I would say when it comes to what you want to study, do what you are good at. If you are a terrible scientist, you hate science, you hate math, if you've given this a chance, you should not force yourself to do this. The best English major, marketing major, dare I say journalism major, and someone who is enthusiastic about that is going to make more money than the bottom tier of the computer programming and in biosciences class, who is not good at this and is only doing it because that is what their parents are making them do. They are not going to end up successful in the field. Now, if you may be kind of good at it, but you're just afraid of doing it, give it a chance. But if this is not something you're good at, you are not going to be good at it. There are other things that you can do and that you can be good at doing, but know what those things are and be enthusiastic and conscientious about learning how to do those things, and you'll do fine in life.
Please throw questions into the Q&A. We're going to wrap up soon if we don't get too many more questions. We have two excellent panelists who are eager to field your questions.
It's true. Let's actually go back to this question about what you tell people, okay?
Yeah.
And because it's a really important, when I say biosciences, I don't necessarily mean being a scientist, okay? There's a lot of jobs, most of the jobs in these industries are not, most of the jobs in tech are not programmer jobs. Okay, most of the jobs in biosciences are not scientist jobs. Okay, it's kind of looking kind of where your field is. You know, you could be a technical writer if you were writing. You could be a salesperson. You could be, you know, a whole range of different jobs, exercising a bunch of different skills. But I think, you know, one of the questions that was in the queue was about online jobs and how much experience was needed and so forth. I spent a lot of time looking at online job listings because I use it as a data source. Okay, and the fact is, what you'll see in growth industries is a lot of jobs being created of all different sorts. Right? And knowing just a little bit about that industry can go a long way. So I would actually, I'm not sure that I agree with what Nicole said about doing what sort of doing what you love. And I'm kind of paraphrasing you on that, okay? But doing what you're good at. I mean, sometimes the market does not reward what you're good at. And I know a lot of people that I sort of get really annoyed. They were told growing up that they should do what they were good at, do what they cared about. Okay, and then they get annoyed that no, the market didn't respond to them, what they wanted. Okay, sometimes the market tells you that these are the skills that that the market wants, and they're willing to reward it. And not only that, you can have a very fun life doing something that you kind of like, sort of exercising it in a way that is professionally rewarding. So I think flexibility, I know that, for example, when the tech industry first started growing in the 1990s, a lot of people got into it that didn't expect to, doing all sorts of different things, and did really well. And I think we're going to see that. I think if you're sort of sensitive to where the opportunities are and move to the opportunities, that's actually a really good way to be successful.
Are you telling me to stop waiting for that tryout from the New York Yankees?
You know, Peter, I'm sure that it's waiting for you out there. Okay, I have no doubt about it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, when I say do what you're good at, I mean, if you love playing the flute, but the market has said you are not going to go to Juilliard, you are not going to be one of the world's top flutists, fine, the market has spoken. This should be your hobby that is very rewarding and fun to do, but you probably won't make a living at it. But there are certain, a base set of skills that you're good at one or the other. I mean, if you are much better at writing, at communicating, at illustrating, at you know, one of those skills versus math or science, be realistic. And of course, if you want to pursue a tech writing career, yes, of course, familiarize yourself in taking college courses with what this industry entails. But what I mean is that if you are not good at science or math, you are not going to be made good at it artificially. So yes, absolutely, though, you can certainly pursue jobs in these fields, but that fit your own base skill set.
I have two quite narrow questions, so I hope you'll give narrow, short answers to them. And what about tradesman jobs? And what about jobs in arts and museums? Just quick thoughts.
I think that's such an excellent question. If you think about tradesman jobs, you think about plumbing, right? Or you think about construction? Is that what you were thinking about when you mean by tradesman?
Well, let's say, I assume that's what the person's talking about, yes.
So if you sort of move forward a little bit, maybe sort of 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a lot more technology in these areas, okay? And so we're going to have a situation where the amount of technical skills that people have that were formerly physical jobs are going to become more cognitive physical jobs. So combining the ability to sort of work with your hands with the ability to sort of work with technology as well. So they're not going to be the same. They're going to get transformed. They're going to become higher productivity, and they become higher pay as well. This is related, incidentally, to the autonomous vehicles, which is going to be creating a lot of new jobs for repair people, because your autonomous vehicle is going to have to operate at a higher level of sophistication than your current car is. So it's going to create jobs to make sure that it works really well. And that's where we're heading for. Jobs that are moving up the ladder in terms of the match between technology and the physical skills.
Sorry, Nicole, you want to throw in on either of those questions, either the tradesmen or the arts and museums?
Yeah, I mean, this is, if we are going to spend 10 years rebuilding physical infrastructure, these are jobs that, yes, there is a level of tech that people will have to start familiarizing themselves, well, learning a skill and then continue to grow with the tech on the job. And there is some level of automation, but these jobs cannot be outsourced overseas. So, and also this is an industry where there are a lot of retirements right now. The industry needs newer workers in construction, in the trades, to replace people who are retiring. And I think with arts in museums, there is, we are in large part an amenity-focused, tourist-focused economy. The demand for those types of cultural exports, because anytime a person comes from overseas to visit a global city and go to the museum, go to the opera, that is considered an export oriented job. So yeah. If this is something where you have a vocation and you have an interest, this is certainly something to pursue.
All right, last question comes from Robert Shermer, and it's, how do you assess the quality of the American labor force?
That's such a good question. I'm going to let Nicole answer that because
I think the labor force is skilled and wanting to work, but very demoralized, and has been demoralized by rhetoric from both parties for 40 years. And I think the good news out of the Trump years is that you may hate Donald Trump. I am not a fan of Donald Trump, but he changed what people say about the labor force. And first of all, in not using the term unskilled labor, which I noticed that Michael did not use the word unskilled labor, as someone who works at one of the New York City airports in taking handicapped people around the airport as a sort of helper for people who can't maneuver themselves around the airport. I mean, she wrote an op-ed a few months ago and said, my job is considered an unskilled job. Well, I have to have interpersonal skills. I have to anticipate a person's need. I have to make conversation with people I don't know, and I may have nothing in common with, including the language. Every job is a skilled job. So it's good that we've moved away from some of that rhetoric. And the very casual, rhetoric that started in the Reagan era, continued through the Clinton years. If your factory job is gone, if your employer wants you to work for half the wage, well, that's fine. You can just retrain for another job. I mean, that's not, first of all, a lot of people did not retrain for new jobs. They just left the workforce. And a very casual approach to then what happens to the region that was home to all of these jobs if the people who do retrain have to move away. I mean, the country never grappled with these issues, and that's how we got Donald Trump. I think we are moving away from that, but doing it slowly, and that we need to treat people working with respect, and there has to be some level where they're able to support their families. If you're working 40 hours a week and you're looking to move up in the world, that has to be something that you are able to do. And where we've fallen short in that right now is with the gig economy. I mean, how must people feel in driving for Uber and Lyft and being told that the entire point of the company is to get rid of these jobs? We are not, and to be told that this is a gig. I mean, going back to the flute, playing the flute a couple of nights and hoping to have some fun and make a little money. but having a full-time job, that's a gig. I mean, these are not gig jobs. People worked as taxi drivers full-time. This was a good living. There were a lot of problems in the industry, but here you have tech companies that come and essentially destroy the industry and say, oh no, the job that you've worked for 40 years, that's not a real job. That's just a gig thing. So we certainly haven't stopped doing this, but I think we've gotten a little bit more mindful about it, which is a good thing.
Great. Mike, if you don't have anything to add, I'm going to turn the mic over to Rhoda Shermer. When she appears on the screen, it's kind of like in the Academy Awards where the music starts coming up. It's like they don't use the hook anymore. Instead, Rhoda comes on screen.
It's looking very anticipatory.
So over to you, Rhoda.
Okay, you got all the questions handled?
Yes.
Peter? Okay. I'm just curious to know what you see is going to be the impact on our colleges and universities with all the kinds of things that you've been talking about.
I think that the business model of a lot of the colleges and universities is not a good one. Okay. That is going to be, they're going to have to find something new to do. The ones in the high cost ones in the middle are going to have problems. Okay. And we've had a bit of an education bubble as well, and not unrelated to the healthcare bubble in terms of job growth. And it's just going to be a tough period. If I go back to sort of my original rubric, which is looking at which industries have done well and which industries have not done well in the downturn, it's hard to tell with education at this point because education was hit directly by the pandemic. We'll see. You know, the current system has lasted a lot longer than I ever would have expected. It could very well be that people decided that they missed it so much that distance learning was not doing it for them, that they'll be willing to sort of pay for it. But this goes under the heading of we ask me this question a year from now and I'll be able to give you a better answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you, a lot of food for thought. I want to thank all of you. Thank you, Dr. Michael Mandel. Thank you, Nicole Gelinas. Thank you, Peter Coy, as usual. It was really an excellent evening and plenty to think about. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Hope to see you again soon.
Yes, thank you.
Do more on this again, updates.
Right.
Thank you, Rhoda.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Peter.
Bye, Nicole.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
Michael.
Peter. Bye, Michael.
Bye-bye.